he said, you should study a happier instrument, like the dombra. People saying, no, he played our national instrument, or he played ours. That music tells you something about those people. I started researching Kazakh music sort of through the study of Russian, but I very quickly started learning Kazakh after I decided that I wanted to focus on Kazakhstan. My research focuses mainly on the kylkobyz, the two-string horsehair string fiddle from Kazakhstan. There were a lot of very interesting stories sort of embedded in the kylkobyz itself. So connections between musical instruments and national identity is a big interest of mine. That's been my main area of research. All of these instruments have origin stories, and I think for a lot of Americans that's an unusual idea to have a whole story about where this musical instrument came from, who made it, why, what were the circumstances of its origin. In the case of the kylkobyz, thousands of years ago, a man named Korkyt Ata, or grandfather Korkyt, had a vision or a dream that he was going to die at an early age. And so he took his camel on a very, very long journey all over the world, searching for the secret of immortality. And according to the story, everywhere he went with his camel, he found people digging graves. And when he would ask the people, who are you digging the grave for? They would answer, for Korkyt. So obviously he got very frustrated in his search for immortality. And at a certain point he realized, he had to accept that he is human, that he is mortal, that someday he's going to die. And he went to the banks of the Surdarya River, which is this very important river in Central Asia. He sacrificed his beloved Jelmaya, his camel, and he found some wood, or he cut down a tree near the river, and he supposedly made the first kylkobyz. And he sat down by the river and he just played and played and played, and he was just mourning and grieving for the fact that he had to accept his mortality. But according to the story, again, when he was playing the kylkobyz, death couldn't touch him. And supposedly he played kylkobyz for 300 years, and he lived an incredibly long time. But at a certain point, there are a lot of different endings to this story, but the one that I've heard most often is that he fell asleep. And when he was asleep, the music stopped. And when the music stopped, a poisonous snake came by and bit him on the foot, and he died of the snake bite. Even though Korkyt, the man, died, he actually did achieve immortality, because we still speak his name, we still tell stories about him, and we still play and listen to the kylkobyz. Korkyt is a pan-Turkic figure. They talk about him in Turkey and Azerbaijan, and there's always sort of an argument about what instrument he actually played. I've actually gotten into debates about this with people saying, no, he played our national instrument, or he played ours. There's a lot of intersections between traditional instruments and national identity. And not only is he recognized as the originator of the kylkobyz, but he's also seen as the first baksa, or folk healer, or shaman. And the kylkobyz was used by shamans for centuries in traditional Kazakh culture. kylkobyz play happy music? I would say absolutely yes. However, when I've talked to many Kazakhs, they often seem to associate the kylkobyz with somber or melancholy or serious emotions. I was in a taxi and I was just chatting with the taxi driver, and he asked about my research, and I said, oh yeah, I study the kylkobyz. And he said, you should study a happier instrument like the dombra. I think one of the reasons why people hear the kylkobyz as a sad instrument is that it had a very sad chapter in its own history. Right during the early years of the Soviet period, it was suppressed. Baksas, folk healers, they were persecuted, imprisoned. Kylkobyz were, confiscated and sometimes burned and buried. It essentially cuts off the transmission of the tradition. And it reminds me of, things that have happened in American history, attempts to assimilate Native Americans, for example, attempts to cut them off from their culture, has the same kinds of effects. So when we're talking about reviving kylkobyz performance and retaining a sense of authenticity, the person that I think of right away is my teacher, Raushan Orazbayeva, that I wrote the article about, because she really believes in the therapeutic power of the kylkobyz, which is in itself a sort of spiritual practice. And it's not as if she's, developed a specific therapy around the kylkobyz. She doesn't go around healing people as a baksa or anything like that, although, she does recognize the healing power of the kylkobyz. She believes in that. But it's one thing to try to reenact what happened during a baksa ritual. It's another to really genuinely feel it. And I think a big part of retaining authenticity in the kylkobyz is not just to focus on the spiritual aspect, because even though I think there is a lot of spirituality in the music, I think it can't be forced, right? It's a very sensitive thing. And if you feel moved by the music, you should go with that feeling, and you should allow the sounds to affect you. And if they take you to a spiritual place, then that's what you should allow to happen. But another musical consideration is the fact that kylkobyz music was never written down until Russian imperial times. And because this music was never written down, it was always sort of improvised. Like, the teacher would always play the composition, the key, a little bit different than his student, because the student would learn it from the teacher and then sort of add his own flourishes or her own improvisations to make it their own. And that practice of improvisation really decreased during the Soviet period, because the belief was that, okay, well, we need to write down all this music. But as soon as you write down the music, it sort of loses something. People start performing the music the same way every single time, and then it becomes sort of fossilized, right? It doesn't breathe, and it doesn't live as vibrantly as it used to. So this is something else that Raushan Orazbayeva is very adamant about, that you have to play the music in your own way. It's not a Mozart symphony, for example. It is a key, and it's meant to have some variation. It's meant to be played in your own individual, unique way. actually really surprised to learn early on that there were songs that used Abai's poems. I really enjoyed learning the melody of Kuzumning Karası, and I remember having all these Kazakh language lessons where we looked at the lyrics and we listened to the melody. Kuzumning Karası, könglimning sanası, bitmey dağ üstüge, aşıklık jarası. Music is an amazing way to learn language, because when you put the poetry and the music together, you have a very sort of potent cultural statement. There's the tradition of jër, or jërau, the epic poems, and those were always sung as well. And epic poetry was so essential to nomadic culture. When people were living a nomadic life, they couldn't carry heavy things like books around with them. They depended on oral tradition. So you memorized your genealogy, you memorized your stories, you memorized your epic poems, which are so huge to people who depend on books and written language. It's almost unbelievable that a human being could memorize so much text. Жатып қалып бір тоқты жайылып мың қой болғаны жер, жабағылай жастайла жардай бір атан қонғаны жер. So yeah, you could tell a story, you could sing a poem as you're playing music, but there are so many pieces of music like kyl, the traditional composition, that don't need any words to tell a story. They tell stories just with the music. I've always been interested in how traditional music and contemporary popular music combine with each other. I really have liked listening to the band Aldaspan. I'm not sure that I have a favorite song of theirs, but I really like the style that they've developed and the way that they've electrified dombras. So they're kind of like a Kazakh traditional / punk band. I've noticed that there's a lot of other different kinds of contemporary popular music in Kazakhstan. So for example, Q-pop has become really popular. It's also interesting to look at the different cultural flows. Just like when you look at the cultures of the historical Silk Road, you notice that there's a lot of connections between those music cultures. Well, now if you look at Q-pop, that's another instance where culture has flowed into Kazakhstan from outside. One really, really influential song for me and my study of Kazakh music is the song Otan Ana by Batır. One year, I think the same year that Batır died, or the year after, they had a performance of Otan Ana during the festival, and it just started pouring rain. But they continued with the performance. After the performance was over, the rain just went away, and everyone thought it was kind of like the spirit of Batır was there. So I just really like that story because it reflects a lot of the beliefs, the spirituality of Kazakh music, the belief that music has a spiritual connection. This is part of why ethnomusicology is really interesting to me. It's that when you look at the music that people are making, producing, listening to in any culture, in any community, that music tells you something about those people and what they are concerned with, what they're thinking about, what they aspire to. And so I'm always really interested to learn more about what people are listening to in Kazakhstan.